Good afternoon, I guess, at 12:05 to all of you joining us today. I am Susan McPherson, and I am thrilled to be here. And thank you to the amazing folks at the Social Innovation Summit for continuing this remarkably wonderful tradition. Every June, we gather people who are making social impact a priority in their professional lives. So I'm honored and grateful to be part or play a small role. And I'm excited that you're all joining us for the next hour to talk about the best corporate strategies to maximize employee engagement. We have a stellar panel, and hopefully we can make it very interactive, which I know everybody after 16 months have been a little zoomed out at this point, but I'll do my best to get the audience involved. Again, I'm Susan McPherson. I'm the founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies, a social impact communications consultancy, and I'm also the author of the book that launched in March, The Lost Art of Connecting. So back to the subject at hand. We all know employee engagement leads to all the good things: better retention, higher productivity, far more likelihood to recommend the company to others. So we're really going to dig in today to how to drive even greater engagement, but also knowing after 16 months of many of us living in isolation, for folks who are driving engagement within companies, it can be very, very challenging and most likely will be for the foreseeable future. So let me take a second to introduce our wonderful panel, and then I'm going to ask them to each give us a little bit more detailed information about their roles at their respective organizations. The first is Katharine Jensen, who is the head of corporate responsibility at Vertex Pharmaceuticals and also leads the Vertex Foundation. And she happens to be in the Boston area. Lorraine Stomski, who is the Senior Vice President of Associate Leadership and Learning at Walmart. And I learned funny enough during our green room chat that she's actually right now in not far from my hometown, which of course I lived in when the dinosaurs roamed, north of Albany, New York. And lastly, Danielle Holly, who is the CEO of Common Impact and happens to be right down the street from me in Brooklyn. So we could have actually done this together. So ladies, why don't we start with Katharine, and if each of you could introduce yourselves and share with us a current project or initiative that you're working on that you're hopefully pretty excited about.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I look forward to being together in person very soon, so maybe this will be one of our last virtual events. One thing we found at Vertex last year is clearly we were all dealing with unplanned and unprecedented challenges. Our employees wanted to respond, so both to COVID-19, to racial and social justice issues, and this applied globally. So what we were very pleased to see is we did offer last year through our matching gift program, an opportunity to double match on certain organizations and causes that employees cared about. And I think partly because of that double match, but frankly, because employees really wanted to get involved and address some of these issues, we saw an increase of 50% of the participation in our program. So building on that, we said, okay, this year, we want to keep that momentum going. It's a way not just to give financial resources, but to connect with our communities and to understand firsthand how some of these nonprofits are addressing challenges in our local communities. So this year, the project I'm working on currently is beginning next week. Our team is looking to continue that momentum and offer an annual matching gift campaign. So we're continuing to offer double match to select organizations. Again, COVID-19, we've expanded it to include many organizations on the ground, for example, in India, which is really facing quite a challenge right now. And in addition, we've added things around the AAPI community. We've also added some patient organizations. Obviously, as a healthcare pharmaceutical company, that's important to us too. So I'm really excited to see how that goes and to be able to continue that momentum of engaging our employees through philanthropy.
Katharine, before we go to the next wonderful panelist, can you just give us a line of what Vertex does? Because
absolutely,
the audience may not know.
Great question, Susan. I make the assumption everyone knows, but of course you do not. We're a Boston-based, headquartered biopharmaceutical company. We've been around for 30 plus years. We have products on the market right now for cystic fibrosis. We have a very strong pipeline looking in other diseases to provide treatment for things like sickle cell disease. We are global, so we have our international headquarters is in London as well. We have research sites in San Diego, Oxford in the UK, and we're just over 3,000 employees.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And, you know, I've learned we can't make assumptions, right?
You're exactly right. Thank you.
Danielle, how about if we turn to you next and common impact?
Sure, thank you, Susan. And hi, everyone. Just want to echo thanks for joining us at the very end of our Zoom fatigue. We all see the light at the end of the tunnel, so understand that it's harder and harder to engage virtually. So just exciting to see everyone in the room, and next year in person. This is one of my favorite gatherings to do in person because visionaries and practitioners all in the same room. So Common Impact is an organization that activates all of our individual superpowers and talents and expertise as a force for good to alleviate inequality. And we do that through corporate strategic engagement programs and pro bono programs. And there's a lot that we're doing right now that I'm excited about. This past year in particular has been a transformative one for employee engagement. I think we're going to get into that in a bit. Our mission has always been focused on alleviating inequality. And over the past 3 years, we've been really focusing and prioritizing racial inequality, knowing that racial inequality amplifies so much of what we see in the world, the societal ills and other forms of inequality like economic and income and gender inequality. And we've been doing that through targeting support of BIPOC-led organizations that typically receive about 45% less revenue than their white-led counterparts, which makes capacity building at those organizations, which is hard overall for the nonprofit sector, so much harder for BIPOC-led organizations that often know best how to serve our communities. And so the work that we're doing to support the capacity building, the technology, financial, operational infrastructure through corporate employee skill sets and talents is to me really motivating and undergirds everything that we're doing right now. So I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Well, we'll definitely dig in, Danielle, and thank you to Common Impact for the important work you're doing. Lorraine Stomski, fill us in on your role and what you're excited about.
Yeah, thank you. Great to see everyone. My way of overcoming Zoom fatigue is I finally got a standing desk. So I have to be very cognizant that I'm standing still because I do a lot of this movement. So great to be with you all here today. I'm Lorraine Stomski. I lead our learning and leadership organization at Walmart. And for those of you not familiar with Walmart, which may be hard to believe given we are, I think the stat is 90% of America lives within 10 miles of a Walmart. So we are the Fortune 1 retailer. And I lead our learning and leadership function, which includes everything from setting the strategies for selection. So from our store workers all the way through our executive ranks, onboarding, performance management, succession and talent planning. And I think and learning, of course, is the centerpiece there. What am I excited about? I think all of us would agree that this year, through the pandemic, it's been the year of the frontline worker. And, our associates, our frontline workers are really the heart of our company. Could not be more proud of them, what they've accomplished over the past year and a half. And what I'm very excited about is the opportunity to provide our frontline associates with debt-free education. And we do that through our Live Better You University. And we're in partnership with Guild, and we provide access to our frontline associates for those educational opportunities from high school degrees, all the high school completion, all the way through college degrees and short form programs. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that, but that's what I'm most proud of is our frontline associates and what we're doing for them.
And just curious, how many frontline associates?
Oh, 1.6 million frontline associates. Yeah. Our remit as an organization is for 2.2, but 1.6, that's the heart of our org.
Amazing. Thank you, Lorraine. And for those who just joined us, we're digging into how to empower or let's just say increase employee engagement, especially given the current environment that we are living in. So we're talking to 3 experts who are advising. And I also want to remind everyone that at 30 minutes past the hour, we're going to be taking Q&A. So please feel free to submit questions and we will do our best to get to them, because I really want to make sure this is as interactive as possible. And also just thanks for popping by, because I know that there's lots of other potential things you could be doing right now. So next question, and feel free for any of you to jump in. In your work, can you share some specific examples or approaches that you, or programs that you have found to be truly successful in driving employee engagement? And I think the more tactical we can get, the more helpful for the audience. And I'm happy for whoever wants to go first, so I don't have to call on you. All right,
I'm happy to jump in.
Thank
before we make you call on us. So Common Impact focuses on skills-based volunteering, which means identifying the specific skills and talents of individuals, particularly corporate employees, and finding the matched need in the social sector, whether that's at a social enterprise or a nonprofit. So if you're a technologist within a company, identifying a technology need at a nonprofit. Nonprofits usually spend between 2 to 8% of their budget on capacity building. That companies invest more than 30% of their budget. I know that sounds kind of brass tacks in accounting, but it's a very real consequence and a very real need. And it aligns with successful employee engagement strategies right now, because 97% of millennials want to use their skills when they give back. And so identifying places to activate employees where they're not just giving their time, but they're also giving their skills, and something that feels unique to them is something that increases acquisition and retention and promotion possibilities and just employee happiness and belonging at a company. And we found that whether it's a day of service or something that's much more extensive and long-term through a sabbatical, and there are different programs and different models that work, but that both time and skill investment seems to activate employees in a different way. It's not just millennials, right? We talk a lot about the millennial generation, and they are the largest component of our workforce right now, and so that feels natural, but I don't know any human or employee that doesn't have a real intent to give back and want to feel unique in doing that. So that's our slice of the world.
Thank you, Danielle. And that could be one of the silver linings also from this past year and a half, that there is a sense of even more wanting to give and support, and the realization that, you know, there is a lot of inequality and a lot of challenges right here in this country, but also as we're seeing, you know, the world is having some major problems, and we're all connected. I mean, to add that. Lorraine or Katharine, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just dovetail off of that, because I found the same thing, Danielle, that we offer, as you said, many companies offer days of service, and we do one annually as well. And last year we had to say, do we think we can do this in October? Is this something that's realistic for us? We decided to push ahead, and what we found was fascinating. One, we had the same level of participation as we do when it's in person. So the majority of our activities were virtual, online, self-directed, not together in person as is traditional, but we found meaningful opportunities for them to mentor students, connect with others in the community, connect with students and teachers. And we're really pleased to see the response that we had. I think part of it is that they were able to go onto our engagement platform, so for employee volunteering, and pick individual actions they could complete. They could complete them at home on their own time. They could sign up and do it on a Zoom call with other people from the company. So one lesson we have is that no matter what the world looks like in the future, we will continue to offer that, because I think it's a way to engage more people, have them in meaningful volunteering experience. As you said, skills-based is so important. So we'd like to see that continue as well.
You know, I just want to raise one point. I think a lot of younger employees sometimes feel that they don't have the skills to offer. But I think, and everybody has superpowers and secret sauces. So I think the owners should almost play into their supervisors to help them tap, because I think sometimes we're missing that opportunity. Lorraine, I see you chomping at the bit, so I want to give.
Well, I agree with both of, certainly what these ladies have said. I think that this year of the pandemic has really caused people, I think young people, older people, regardless, to step back and sort of assess, right, where they are. And I think it's opened up the floodgates, candidly, to this notion of upskilling. Where is my career going? This access to opportunity, as I said. And what we've seen, at Walmart, we are extremely purpose-driven company. It's a very simple purpose, save money so people can live better. Part of living better is having that access to educational opportunities. It is so expensive, as we all know, to get degrees. And, for us, being able to open up that opportunity for people to, think about our frontline workers. Many of them are just, working hard, super talented people. But we've really been able to cater our educational opportunities to the adult learner so that they can finish up high school, or they can actually, really create a career path, at Walmart, and supplement that with debt-free education. So that, to me, I feel, really good about. And we've seen just such a surge in participation, graduation rates, really wonderful stories about people going from hourly, getting business degrees, and moving on to salaried jobs, even moving to Bentonville. So it's been a great success story, but I think it's because we really, as I said, we are so purpose-driven, so associate-centered, that we were, really able to make that happen. So,
sure.
I think that is one of, when I see us looking into the future in terms of future of work and what the legacy of the pandemic will be for the workforce and employee engagement, I think that teasing apart of those skills and experiences and competencies from prepackaged roles, yes, is going to be something that is really important and I think beneficial and lifting for employee engagement and social sector work, because in order to have these cross-sector partnerships and these social impact initiatives really work, it has to move beyond these functional skills that we've talked about in the past, right? There are cultural competencies, there are lived experiences that we need in those engagements. And specifically for employees, and Susan, to your point around younger employees, the digital natives that are our college grads and our younger employees that really understand consumer behavior and consumer appetite are teaching a lot of more tenured professionals in those areas. And so I think there's kind of a breaking open of what skill set means now.
Oh, it's the Wild West for sure. And that goes back to every single one of us has chief differentiating factors, whether you're just graduating college or approaching retirement. And it really, I put the onus oftentimes on the people in power and organizations to tap into that. You can't obviously force people to volunteer and engage, but you need to show them what are the advantages. I'm so happy, ladies. We are actually getting lots of questions from the audience. I'm going to take one and then we can go back. And this one actually is specifically for you, Danielle, and it's for common impact. How often do you assess employee skill sets? Are your volunteer opportunities aligned with your company's strategic focus, or do you find volunteer opportunities that align with the skills identified? And that is from Tanisha Rush. And thank you, Tanisha.
So the question is, how often do we assess the corporate employee skill set?
I think
yeah, it is project by project. So every project that we do, we are assessing those skill sets anew. We have something that we call a skills inventory, where employees will self-identify where they're at on a spectrum across a variety of skills, and the skills that we talked about before: leadership skills, workplace skills, and then those functional skills. And then we'll look at those for each initiative, for each project, and make sure that there is a tight match, which is fun, particularly for employees that keep coming back to projects, because they see how those projects have enhanced their skills and how maybe they were novice on one project and now intermediate on the next, but it needs to stay fresh. And one of the things that we found working with a lot of companies is that most companies are focused on the same core competencies and skill sets. We just call them different things. So there's some semantic translation, but in general, really honing in on the leadership and functional qualities is something that is an important overarching strategy, but also a really dynamic process as we go along.
Super helpful, Danielle. Thank you. So back to a couple more questions, and then we'll go back to the audience. And thank you again, Tanisha, for asking that. For Vertex and for Walmart, I'm sure you have come up with, creative ways to keep employees across all levels. And obviously you're very, differing size organizations, but help our audience understand, how does one do that? How can you employ these strategies scale to fit businesses of both sides? And obviously, again, very differing situations. So I think it's going to be helpful for people to hear how you both kind of take this on.
Sure, I can start. So we have a very open communication and dialogue with our employees. So we had, in addition to the pandemic and the social unrest that we faced last year, we also had a CEO transition, and we had a new CEO starting in April. And one of the things she's been very focused on is speaking to our employees directly and hearing their feedback, but then acting on it. And I think that's something that has worked quite well. So there's an open comment box where employees to this day can, it's like a suggestion box, give their ideas, give their feedback, and then a response goes to them. So how did we act on it? The second thing is, like many companies, we also do biannual actually pulse surveys or engagement surveys. So we can see real time, are employees feeling engaged? Are they feeling connected to the company? And so last year, our score actually increased. And I think it's a result of some of those efforts. And we know we're about 16 points above our peer companies when we do this. The final thing I would say, and it builds a little bit from the previous conversation, is I think it's important for employees at every level to feel their voice is heard and that they're contributing. So one thing the corporate responsibility team has done is engage with our employee resource networks. We call them ERNs, to ask them, what are the nonprofits you would like us to support? And for you to be able to engage and volunteer with them. And that's been a really successful collaboration. They helped us to identify some of the organizations that we make grants to, that employees can support and indeed volunteer with on our day of service. So I think it's being able to truly have an open dialogue and hear both ways. And if we can't do something, equally to tell them why we can't do something. But those are a couple of the ways that we've been able to engage with them.
Really helpful, Katharine. And I just want to echo, asking our employees, right? Not only does that inform, obviously, decision making, but it gets them excited to be involved. And, I'm dating myself here, but I've been working in corporate responsibility for now close to 20 years. And, it's amazing to see how, employee engagement used to be kind of like, what? Because it was all about just check writing. And now it is a full enterprise activity where every single person can play a role. And I think you just shared that. Lorraine, you want to give a bit of an example of a much, larger, I guess, and a differing company, a consumer-based company?
Very, very different. Just very similar, Katharine, to what you said. We have this really, I'd say, deeply entrenched culture around listening. We call them listening sessions. And so we're doing that a lot with we call them our associate resource groups, but certainly at when the civil unrest happened, we had open forums, really openly talking about what was going on in the country. You may have heard we've invested $100 million in racial equity through our shared value networks, where we're looking at creating equitable practices across finance, criminal justice, education. And that's been ongoing and will continue. We also did small things, though, what I think we'd all call low-hanging fruit, which is we created a series with our Chief Diversity Officer and our CPO, Donna Morris, where it was a Race Ahead series. We'd bring the topics, have that conversation, open it up to all of our employees. And the other thing that was built off of that was it really created a program that would create advocates, diversity and equity advocates in the field. So they would go through the educational process And then they would get certified to be advocates to really ensure inclusive environments in the field. So again, lots of things going on, some of them really simple to do, others, right? We probably won't see that return for quite some time. It will take years, but again, just it takes a lot of little things as well as some of those big initiatives.
It takes a village, as the old adage goes, right? and in your case, a very big village. All right, a very tactical question, but a good one from Raphael Cantu. And this can go to any of you or all three of you. How can a nonprofit begin to develop skills-based volunteering events and other employee engagement opportunities that align well with corporate initiatives? And I ask that one because I am sure there are many people in the audience who work at nonprofits and are trying to understand how to create programs that would be valuable for corporations.
I can go and start. What I would say is, what is the focus of the nonprofit? So what are the skills you're looking to have? I would start there and be able to articulate what types of skills. Is it financial? Is it accounting? Do you need legal support? We have a very strong pro bono legal support program, for example, at Vertex, as many companies do. So I think articulating what the specific skills are is a first start. The second piece is then identifying companies that are local to your nonprofit who are in that industry or could provide those skills. So that would be my advice.
Excellent.
I would echo that. I was going to say, essentially don't. Think about what you need first as a nonprofit, and think about then what pro bono and skills-based volunteering can help support in the way that you think about how to align budget with that, because there are so many companies engaged in skilled volunteering now. Nearly every skill set is available to you and has to be meaningful to your organization. And in that, you are setting it up for success, right? Because that will be clear when you go to a company that this is something that's a strategic priority and not something that is a door opener to a larger partnership. So
if I can jump in, I always suggest nonprofits, which is a hard thing to say, but it's almost like, what can you do for the company versus what can the company do for you? Although in the end, it's symbiotic partnership. I would go so far as say it's a marriage, but I think it's really asking yourself as the leader of a nonprofit or an executive with a nonprofit is what are the, again, not to be redundant, but what are the superpowers that you can bring? What are the benefits that you can bring? And that is going to help the corporation become much more engaged, or at least in my experience. Lorraine, did you want to hop in on that one? No, all good. All right. Let's go back to one more of my questions, and then we'll take it more from the audience. This is the holy grail. I mean, you all have been working in employee engagement, and obviously this past 16 months has been, we could spend the next half hour talking about how filled with insanity and horror and challenges. But now that we're kind of coming to the close, or at least here in the US, obviously not globally, what changes are you starting to see? I mean, are you finding that employees are starting to like perk up about volunteering, or are you getting more questions? Anyhow, I put it out to the three of you to get a sense, and hoping you fill us with optimism, but maybe I'm jumping ahead.
I think it still remains true that employees want to be engaged in their local communities with their company and feel like they're making a difference and contributing. So whether that's in person or virtual, what we've learned through this is that virtual can be as impactful as when we are together. So we certainly can continue having, for example, we have an annual ID&E week. And this year we had huge participation. We had a huge number of speakers. And that's one way people can engage and have small discussions offline. So as we return to the office and in person, that will continue too. So making sure that we meet people where they are, that they have the opportunity to participate in any of the company's programs, and also feel connected to the local community. So I don't think that will change regardless of if it's in person or virtual.
Thank you, Katharine. Anybody else want to hop in?
I was so excited to see the trajectory of employee engagement over the past 16 months. CSR, corporate social responsibility, and employee engagement in general really became what it is over the past 10 years when we had real economic certainty and prosperity. And it would be easy for that to dissipate in harder times. And what we saw was actually an increased intent to give and to volunteer, and also an increased expectation of employers to provide those opportunities and to speak out on social and human rights issues. So I think we have a really powerful opportunity right now to take advantage of that. And right, exactly. And the other thing that I think the pandemic spotlighted was the need for equity with volunteering. Volunteering is a pretty white game right now, because it is employees that have had access to privilege that have been able to volunteer, whether that's you're able to donate time and not get paid for it, or feel like you don't have to work quite as hard as your counterparts to get that next promotion. And one of the things that we've seen our corporate partners do is really work in lockstep with their diversity, equity, inclusion departments to make sure that they're including their volunteers are representative of their full company and of the communities that they're serving.
Danielle, thank you so much for bringing that up. And we have to look back at kind of the history of this industry. Philanthropy has traditionally been a very white and privileged world, and volunteerism grew out of that. I mean, you almost had to write a check so that you could volunteer. And thankfully, those days are over, and companies and nonprofits are valuing this whole notion of skills-based. But I do think it's important to break out that skills doesn't have to be teaching, even though it's important, but there's more than just teaching girls to program, which again, it's very, very important, but there are so many ways, and I think it was you, Lorraine, that brought that up. This is a very good question that I want to raise, and that is, and it's from Sarah Bavar, and forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but how do you engage employees when the company is global? I would imagine that would be Katharine and Lorraine. In other words, when there may be cultural differences with regards to giving and volunteerism, and Danielle, you raised that in just the last answer to a certain extent. For example, Sarah's employees are based in China, and it's just not culturally part of their lexicon to volunteer at this point in time. That could change, but she's wanting to know how to get everyone involved in one way or another.
Maybe I'll start, and then Katharine, please jump in. I mean, we obviously we have locations in China and LATAM and Canada, and so I do think that it does actually become much more community-based. At the same time, I will say that this whole notion about community has really shifted, right? It's gone from being local to what your interests are and how do you collaborate and align, regardless of boundaries. So I actually think that's been really interesting to see. And it certainly happened with us being physical in Bentonville. We've actually done quite a few things around just, racial equity, things happening in the community, and we've just had volunteers or community participation beyond the walls of Arkansas. So just as an example, I think that was very unique because of the pandemic, sort of accelerated that notion. So
I agree, and I can feel for Sarah who asked the question. I think there are always cultural challenges globally, and so what works in the US is not going to work in Germany or China. And I was just speaking to a colleague this morning about this, about making sure we're providing the right types of volunteering opportunities for different colleagues where they're located. I think the reality is it's not going to be a cookie cutter exercise. And so to provide different options is one way. So maybe it's donating money in one country and they don't volunteer. It could be the reverse in some other countries. And that's one way to try to look at it. One example I could give you is that last year when we were looking at making COVID-19 immediate donations, we turned to our colleagues in country and said, who are nonprofits who are on the ground responding? We don't want it to go somewhere that will just sit for a year and not be deployed. We want our funds in the community. So we found it was really helpful. And it was frankly the first time we engaged many colleagues across the globe and gave them the opportunity to nominate nonprofits that they know in their local communities. And indeed, we're now building relationships with them. So building out from our initial financial grant to now having volunteering opportunities, having lunch and learns where employees can learn about the issues in their community. So that might be one idea for Sarah.
Thank you, Katharine. Danielle, this is a question I want to direct to you first from Kaisen Buntuwang. She's asking specifically about how companies are working with grassroots nonprofits, considering that they have very different needs, cultures, et cetera, than large nonprofits. I would imagine that's something that you are very well suited to answer.
Yeah, and it's something that is a challenge for large companies right now, right? Identifying the organizations that they should be investing in that aren't the brand names, that aren't the well-known national organizations. And we see more and more intent to do that. And that's where the support of intermediaries and nonprofit conveners and the folks that are on the ground experts and community foundations can be really helpful in understanding which grassroots organizations should and need the support. The two dynamics that I would just raise on that topic is, one, it's really important for those grassroots organizations, particularly campaign and advocacy organizations, to maintain their mission and their point of view and their philosophies, even when being funded by corporate partners. And so making sure that the mission and philosophies are really aligned is some of the initial work that needs to be done. And the second is to leverage partnerships and to look beyond the brand names and to understand from the experts who's on the ground, who is serving the communities that you ultimately want to serve and inform through your philanthropic and your volunteerism work, and making sure that those are aligned. They're often grassroots organizations and smaller nonprofit startup organizations have less infrastructure to absorb corporate philanthropy and volunteerism. And so providing the awareness, but also the infrastructure funding to those organizations so that they can create opportunities for your volunteers that are meaningful to them and can make the most use and effective use of the funds that are being provided. Important across the board with funding and volunteerism, but particularly with grassroots organizations.
So helpful. Thank you, Danielle. You really know this space. I'm blown away. I'm gonna call you up later today.
And coffee in Brooklyn, right?
Yes, yes. We can go for a walk and talk, for God's sakes, once my dog is back. The next question is near and dear to my heart because it's concerning the awareness and the communications of employee engagement. And not to tout our own harm, but we are working with a variety of organizations to help employees understand what the opportunities are. Because we know there's so much noise, right? I mean, and trying to get word out to your individual employees that these opportunities exist is probably challenging, regardless of the size of the organization. So the specific question is, how do you raise awareness? And you know, obviously very different probably between Lorraine and Katharine, and certainly Danielle, you're welcome to weigh in, but how do you get the information out there so people know this even exists? And how do you showcase those who are really stepping up so that others really want to join?
I think this is the $1 million question, and we talk about it a lot. So we have robust and really strong internal communications. We use social media, and sometimes it's just not enough. So there's such a ample amount of internal communications, especially now that we have all been remote, that it is hard to cut through the noise. I think what we have found is most effective is emails directly from your leader. So that's a technique we're turning more often to. So yes, we'll post on our internal intranet and we'll make a post on social media about a campaign or a volunteering activity. But if your direct manager, your boss's boss shares information with you, it may likely be more likely read and you might participate. So that's one way we've addressed it.
Yeah, very similar to Katharine, although we are really big users of Workplace. And that tends to be a great way to get the messaging out there, sign up and interest. So Workplace seems to be the...
Time out. What is Workplace?
Oh, Facebook Workplace.
Oh, that's new. All right.
Okay. So
What's the crowd here?
Think of it as Facebook for, a company.
Got it.
And that's how, we draw people to those opportunities as well.
You're finding where people are actually living. Yeah, I mean, and that is the old adage. Danielle,
I think there's one other technology we use, because that's a great point. So we have an internal portal for our matching and giving programs. And we tried to, I hate to say the word, but gamify it a little bit last year. So people would be able to earn points for doing an activity. They could share that they were doing it with their colleagues. And that also has helped to drive engagement.
Absolutely. Several of our clients use Benevity
yes.
for much of that, which you probably are all familiar with. This is kind of a pile on to the last question, but I think it's really an important one to address. And how do you moderate, and this is from Karina Mohajirani, how do you moderate your social collaboration tools to ensure that your employees feel engaged and that they discuss important topics while keeping things inclusive and ensuring there's no inflammatory language or information? I mean, this is the challenge. For example, political and racial topics are important to discuss, but sensitive to many. When hosting open forums about civil unrest or even vaccinations, and that was my word, not Karina's. How are you able to moderate and promote discussion without scaring people away? And I'm paraphrasing a bit just to widen the conversation. Anyone want to talk about that? It's a hard one.
It's a hard one. I mean, absolutely, people are. Great question. Yeah, it's a great question. We obviously have people that are looking at that all the time. It's not a perfect science by any means. I think the one thing that I would say, at least for Walmart, is we are very values-based in that all of our associates, we talk about our values all the time. Doug McMillan, our CEO, just talked last week, did a video actually at our shareholders about values and how we lead with our values. So that's how we at least manage, the messaging. But, there's also, people that scan all of our social media and even workplace, now that we all know what workplace is as well.
Anyone else want to?
No, I think I agree with what Lorraine said. It comes to your culture and your values and the tone that is set. So I think they're really difficult conversations, but giving people the ability to have them in a safe environment is what's important. We've offered fireside chats, so one-on-one conversations between our CEO and an employee. We've offered listening circles, so smaller groups of employees can get together and speak. And finally, our employee resource networks are instrumental in all of this work. So hearing from them directly has been quite helpful.
Well, and I do think this also needs to come from the very senior parts of the organization, that they're going to be involved too, and to open themselves up as well, because I think people often feel safer if others are opening up and not just expecting everyone else. This next question from Lucian Snow is very near and dear to my heart, and it reads, has anyone experimented with employee book clubs, and did you find that helpful for employee engagement? Well, Lucian, I launched a book on March 30th, and I've done 52 book talks at companies since then. Whether it's leading to engagement, I don't know, but it's this notion of how do you connect employees? And obviously after this past year, building connections amongst employees is actually a productivity tool. A little different, obviously, than we're talking. So I don't want to take up this valuable time to talk about it. But from the outsider's perspective, it has led to very engaging conversations. It's a very different thing from employee engagement. So I'll turn it over to the crew and ask them. But
yeah, we did our pilot, I'll say, book club. The Vertex Foundation funded the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research that started last year. And we provided all of our employees with a copy of How to Be an Anti-Racist, written by their executive director. And then we had him come in and speak to employees. And so we did it two ways. One was a large gathering where the themes of the book were discussed, and employees could then sign up on a one-on-one basis to have, again, smaller group discussions about the book and the contents of it. So I think there will be more to come. That was honestly the first time we've done it, but I think there's a lot of opportunity there and a way to spark conversation. So Susan, we can talk afterwards.
No pressure.
We have something similar coming. In fact, obviously a different scale, but we've to the building an anti-racist culture that you were just talking about, Katharine, important for us externally in our work, but also to continue to practice that internally. And so shared Annalise Singh's Racial Justice Handbook, which is a practitioner handbook that we've all worked through together, and then have also started internal conversations that aren't necessarily reading a book, because that can sometimes be a barrier if it happens too frequently, but reading a piece, reading an article, thinking about a topic and its personal application to you and to the work that we do every day. And it's been a really nice way to practice and feel like a cohesive group working together, particularly in this environment, right? It's so hard in this environment to have activities like that that feel meaningful and connecting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully we're on an uptick, hopefully.
One thing that we did, well, several things that we did at Walmart, we definitely have had speakers. The other interesting thing that we did was we actually created some race and inclusion learning series that were just really curated pathways that everyone could access. Our 2.2 million employees, whether you were sitting in China or you were in hourly worker at the store, we got a lot of consumption around that because people are curious, right? We talk a lot about the first step is really educating yourself. And so we were good about curating that. And then for our executive level folks, our officers is what we call them, we actually had REI, which is the Racial Equity Institute, do believe it or not, a 2-day virtual session that was mandated for all of our officers to go through. And we had, a really incredible experience with them just going through it, just to, again, educate and bring awareness to our senior leadership team.
Great, thank you. This is an interesting question from Allie. And again, it's so hard because I don't want to butcher people's names in any shape, way, or form. Bushjager, hopefully I got it close. But her question is, how do organizations go about identifying and vetting nonprofits to partner with to help reach your employee engagement goals? And I know, Danielle, we talked a little bit about it, but maybe you can take this first and then we can expand. And I just want to give a time check. We have about 8 minutes left.
So some work with intermediaries like Common Impact that does that work for them. I think regardless, you need some
highly recommended, folks. Just saying.
Regardless, you need some level of community or nonprofit expertise that is supporting you in vetting the organizations and has that lens of what does it take to run a nonprofit and what are the things that are the symptoms of the challenges and the core challenge that you can help support as a company. And this is one of the flips really that has been really positive for cross-sector relationships in the past 10 years, certainly, but really over the past 2 years, is that companies are listening more to what nonprofits need versus saying, here's the resource that I have to give. Here are the number of volunteers, or here's the pot of funds, but listening first to what organizations need and understanding their readiness to engage in the match between partnerships. So it gets much more tactical than that. Those are the headlines. And if we had 4 hours, we could go into that.
Yeah, I think this is the whole conference in itself. And I want to just say to the audience, we're getting so many questions, and I just want to apologize if I can't get to all of them. I'm doing the best I can. And I know our speakers are also answering as succinctly as they can, but also trying to give you as much detailed information that you can take back to the workplace. And Waleed Jamil says, I hear amazing stories of success and wins. What's the opposite? What do you advise we not do? I love that. What experiments did not pan out? Thank you. Being the contrarian. I love it. This is like that whole, like, it's okay to fail. That's how we learn. Anybody want to share?
I have so many failures. I don't even know where to begin.
Like they say, after you have a failure, you get a TED Talk. So,
all right, I'm ready. So I think one of the reflections that I've had in this space, and to my comments earlier, that volunteerism and corporate philanthropy really stem from a pretty cultural and racial homogenous place. And particularly with Common Impact, we work with large Fortune 100 and 500 companies. And so often it is the folks that are in leadership and are disconnected from the ground and the practice and the lived experiences that are making decisions based on their experience. And it is, and looking at this panel, right, we're all white women talking about this work.
Yeah,
and so this is not one mistake, but I think a journey that I have been on and that Common Impact has been on to make sure that we have the right voices in the room. And for me personally, that has meant stepping back and not being the one who gives the TED Talk and putting down the mic and making sure that I am creating space for other folks to step into that have a more proximate and accurate view of the social challenges that we're trying to solve, and that I'm powering from behind instead of in front. So that's the one that is most on my mind and continues to be a journey.
Danielle, thank you so much for raising that. And I think it's definitely a very glaring error. And I appreciate what you just said completely. Anyone else want to share a failure?
I would add, I would say maybe not so much a failure, but could have gone better, is sometimes if the nonprofit partner, we've asked them to do a lunch and learn, which is usually very impactful and people learn about it. But sometimes it can be more of a fundraising pitch. And that's not so successful because generally we invite in partners. And to the earlier question, we try to work with partners where we have a longstanding relationship or have made a financial commitment as well. So it's all tied together. But if we come and just present what the organization does, and then at the end, how can you get involved, is give us money, that doesn't really resonate. And so you don't get that engagement piece. So I think it's something we've learned, and we worked on that a lot last year. We had various opportunities for that to happen. And I think now we've learned that it needs to be an actionable item if it's a lunch and learn and there's an ask at the end.
Wonderful. Lorraine, anything you want to add?
Yeah, just, from a learning perspective, similar in that I think we've learned that, you've got to meet the learner where he or she is, right? And this notion about forcing people to do learning is just not, it's not productive, right? So we've done some learning ourselves around that, what we push, what's a pull.
I want to ask this because finally mental health and mental wellness is becoming front news, and thank you Naomi Osaka, and thank you for many others who are stepping up, and if anything, we're probably not even beginning to unpack what this pandemic has reared on entire societies. But Mike Garrick, and again, apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name right, but the question is, have you looked into how mental health benefits arrive from volunteering and mentoring, and any lessons on the mental health front that you have seen from coming out of employees being better engaged, volunteering, et cetera?
Wow, that's a pretty big question. So I think I can talk about the two separately, but I haven't seen a way to connect them, at least as of yet. So I'm love to hear what others have to say. I know for ourselves that we've provided a lot of mental health resources, free things like Headspace app, the ability to work from home, flexible working for the rest of the year, childcare support, et cetera, as many companies and organizations have. I think with volunteering, the key though is that engagement piece. So I'll turn to what I said earlier, which is we do survey and see what our engagement levels are. And to see it increase, it means, I think, that people are engaged in the volunteering, in the community programs, and feel connected, because it's all about connectivity back to the company. So I'd love to hear what others have to say about the mental health piece of it though, because that's a challenge.
Well, and we only have 30 seconds left, unless they're going to allow us to go over. But I think that is something, that's an entire session of itself. And I want to, because we're pretty much out of time, I want to thank the audience, because talking about being engaged, this was a very engaged audience. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I also want to thank Lorraine with Walmart, Danielle with Common Impact, and Katharine with Vertex Pharmaceuticals for sharing your wisdom and knowledge and your candor today and your openness. And I want to thank the folks at Social Innovation Summit for continuing to bring us all together and connect us. Wishing everyone a wonderful day.